ladies and gentlemen. There are very few people in this world whose minds seem to run on a frequency that most of us can't even hear. It's not intelligence alone that sets them apart, it's the way they process reality. They see systems, patterns, outcomes. They perceive time differently. But what happens when such a mind meets emotion? What happens when an individual built upon logic, physics, and futuristic vision encounters the one force that no equation can predict, the human heart? Tonight, I want to take you on a journey, not of technology, not of Mars, not of rockets or revolutions, but of understanding. Understanding one human being who has spent his life re-engineering what humanity believes possible, and the one woman who understands him better than anyone else. To truly grasp that kind of relationship, you must first understand how a mind like his operates. You see, in neuroscience, there's something called hyperfocus. It's the state in which the brain's prefrontal cortex suppresses irrelevant signals, allowing a person to channel almost superhuman attention into one pursuit. This is not just concentration, it's immersion, total cognitive surrender to an idea. For most people, this happens rarely, maybe during moments of passion or creativity. For him, it's his default state. Imagine living like that, every waking hour turned toward solving existential problems. Energy, transport, AI, interplanetary life, not hobbies but obsessions. Such people don't merely think about the future, they inhabit it. Their emotional wiring becomes shaped around purpose, not comfort. Their dopamine systems, the brain's reward pathways, no longer light up from social validation or rest, but from solving the next impossible problem. And yet, for every system that operates with that kind of precision, there's an equally powerful counterforce, the need for human connection. Even the most brilliant circuitry demands grounding. Even the sharpest mind requires softness, not to weaken it, but to stabilize it. The paradox of human greatness is that it often demands solitude while secretly craving understanding. And for a man who has built rockets, cars, networks, and dreams, the rarest thing he could ever build was trust. Now, the woman who understands him doesn't do so through admiration or submission. She does so through recognition. She doesn't see the billionaire, the engineer, the disruptor. She sees the human architecture behind it, the fatigue, the self-doubt, the restless mind that can't turn off at night. Where others see obsession, she sees purpose. Where others see cold ambition, she recognizes the quiet anxiety of someone who has convinced himself that if he stops moving, the world will collapse. There's a neurological phenomenon we often study in high-performance individuals called emotional masking. These individuals are so conditioned to perform, to think, to lead, that they unconsciously suppress emotional cues in order to maintain control. The brain learns to prioritize logic over vulnerability. But when someone truly understands you, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, begins to deactivate in their presence. That's what emotional safety feels like, the ability to exist without editing your own thoughts. He found that in her. She doesn't calm him by telling him to slow down. That would never work. She calms him by understanding his speed. She mirrors his energy, decodes his silences, senses when his thoughts are accelerating toward burnout. That kind of attunement is rare. It's not romanticism, it's neurobiological synchrony. Their conversations might last hours, not about love, but about entropy, consciousness, the future of AI, or why human beings still choose comfort over truth. But within those discussions, between logic and laughter, lies something profound, connection built on shared pattern recognition. In neuroscience, we call this limbic resonance, when two nervous systems begin to harmonize through empathy and mutual understanding. It's not a metaphor. It's measurable. Heart rates align, breathing synchronizes, and even brainwave frequencies begin to echo each other. It's as if two minds briefly become one shared field. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, validation, fame, resources, she simply offered presence, no demand, no stage, just stillness. And that stillness, for a man whose life is built upon chaos, is the rarest luxury of all. Let's talk about why that matters. You see, innovation isn't born from chaos alone. It needs emotional coherence. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function, relies on emotional regulation to sustain long-term focus. When someone constantly lives in a storm of public scrutiny, deadlines, and existential ambition, that regulation becomes fragile. One misunderstanding, one betrayal, one night without trust, and even the sharpest mind begins to erode from within. It's not burnout in the traditional sense. It's something subtler, emotional dissonance. But when you have someone who truly gets you, someone who sees the architecture of your mind and doesn't flinch, your entire neural equilibrium begins to reset. Cortisol levels drop, dopamine becomes more balanced, creativity flows again. You stop performing and you start being. For the first time, the brain feels permission to rest without guilt. That's the power of emotional attunement. She provides that for him. Now, understanding such a relationship requires us to challenge a societal myth that geniuses, visionaries, or leaders must choose between love and purpose. The truth is, they can coexist, but only when both individuals operate from the same level of awareness. In a way, she is not his escape from the world, she's his mirror within it. Through her, he's reminded that humanity is not a weakness to engineer out of existence. It's the very reason for his work. Every rocket, every neural link, every innovation is ultimately an attempt to reduce suffering, to expand the limits of human potential. And she reminds him why that matters. There's something profoundly beautiful about being understood beyond words. It's not about agreement or praise. It's about being seen clearly enough that your mind can finally exhale. In a world where he is often portrayed as robotic, extreme, or unreachable, her presence humanizes him, not by softening his edges, but by giving them meaning. She doesn't need to fix him. She understands that his chaos is part of his genius. She simply makes space for it to exist without judgment. And in that space, he finds balance. The kind that no success, no headline, no award could ever provide. This is not just love, it's cognitive harmony, it's emotional physics. If we were to scan their brains in conversation, I suspect we'd see something remarkable. Not just mutual activity in the prefrontal cortex, but synchronized oscillations in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region associated with empathy and error detection. It's the brain's way of saying, I see you, I get you. You're not alone in this data storm. When that happens, even a man who spends his life among machines begins to rediscover the value of human emotion. It's a quiet revolution, one that doesn't make headlines but transforms everything. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where the real transformation begins. Not in a laboratory, not in a factory, not in a launch site, but within the brain itself. When understanding enters a relationship, it alters the neurochemistry of both people involved. Oxytocin levels rise, the neurochemical of trust. The vagus nerve activates, deepening calmness, improving heart rate variability, synchronizing two biological systems in a shared rhythm of peace. This is not poetry, it is measurable science. For someone like him, whose nervous system lives in a perpetual state of high alert, whose mind is always calculating, projecting, optimizing, that biological alignment with another human being can feel like silence after a storm. It's not that the noise disappears, it's that the brain finally learns how to hear stillness again. That's what she gives him. Not distraction, not escape, but equilibrium. She knows that he doesn't need to be told to rest. Rest doesn't come easily to a mind trained to equate stillness with wasted potential. Instead, she gives him context, a way to rest without guilt, a reminder that the body, too, is an engineering masterpiece that needs maintenance, not neglect. When she looks at him and says nothing, her silence becomes the one place where his internal monologue stops trying to solve everything. And here's the paradox. The stronger the mind, the deeper the need for someone who can understand without asking. Because every innovator eventually faces the loneliness of perception, the realization that the very thing that makes them extraordinary also isolates them. They are surrounded by people who admire them, but cannot follow their thought patterns far enough to truly connect. Admiration is easy. Understanding is rare. She bridges that gap. She doesn't seek to decode him. She doesn't attempt to reduce his complexity into manageable fragments. Instead, she accepts the complexity as a landscape, not a puzzle to solve, but a terrain to explore. That acceptance changes him. It quiets the part of his brain constantly trying to justify itself. For someone whose life has been a series of equations, she becomes the variable he can't, and doesn't need to, calculate. And when that happens, his creativity evolves. It no longer stems from tension alone. It flows from balance. The human mind, when emotionally stable, becomes exponentially more innovative. MRI studies show that when emotional regulation is high, the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with imagination and problem solving, becomes more coherent. That coherence is the seed of innovation. It's why some of the world's greatest breakthroughs often emerge not from chaos but from connection. She helps him reach that state. Not by changing him, but by resonating with him. Now, you might wonder, what does it take for a woman to understand such a mind? It's not about intelligence alone. It's emotional fluency. It's the ability to read between lines of logic and hear the unsaid frequencies of emotion that lie beneath. It's knowing when a question is really a confession and when silence is a form of communication. It's being able to exist in his orbit without trying to compete with it. She knows that his drive is not born from arrogance, but from responsibility, an almost unbearable weight that he carries on behalf of the future. When you live with that kind of purpose, love becomes less about comfort and more about companionship in the mission itself. And she understands that mission, not through ambition, but through empathy. There's something remarkable that happens in relationships like this. They don't drain energy, they recycle it. Her presence doesn't slow him down, it refuels him. The human brain consumes nearly 20% of the body's energy, even at rest. A mind constantly in motion burns through emotional and physical reserves at an extraordinary rate. But when he's with her, his entire energy system shifts from fight or flight to flow. The sympathetic nervous system quiets. The parasympathetic takes over. And in that physiological harmony, ideas begin to flourish again. She knows when to challenge him and when to let silence do the teaching. Because sometimes, the best form of understanding is an agreement. It's endurance. It's standing beside someone who's misunderstood by millions and reminding them, without words, that they're not entirely alone. Understanding someone like him requires patience that defies ordinary logic. Because he doesn't express emotion in the ways people expect. He might not say, "I miss you," or "I need you." But he'll send a random message about something he just built, or a problem he's been solving at 3 a.m. That's his version of connection, not through sentiment, but through shared curiosity. And she recognizes it instantly. She doesn't demand translation. She speaks the same dialect of wonder. You see, in neuroscience, there's an emerging concept called empathic alignment. It's when two individuals process information through mirrored predictive models of each other's emotional states. Simply put, they anticipate how the other thinks and feels almost instinctively. It's not telepathy, it's training. The brain, through repeated exposure, learns to simulate the other person's mind. In her case, it's not imitation, it's synchronization. Over time, her empathy becomes not just emotional but computational. She doesn't just feel for him, she thinks with him. And that is what separates her from everyone else. Because when he talks about colonizing Mars, she doesn't laugh. She doesn't ask, "Why Mars?" She asks, "How will human psychology adapt to that level of isolation?" She meets him on the frontier between science and soul. She doesn't shrink from his dreams. She expands them. And in return, he starts to dream differently. Not only about the future of humanity, but about what it means to stay human while building it. There's a quiet moment that defines them. Picture him standing by a window late at night, cities asleep beneath him, brain still whirring through algorithms, trajectories, probabilities. She walks up behind him, says nothing, just places a hand on his shoulder. And in that brief, silent contact, something extraordinary happens. His mind, which usually runs like a particle accelerator, slows down just enough to feel present. That's what understanding does. It doesn't demand attention, it restores it. For years, he has been building systems that can survive on other planets. But she reminds him to build systems that can survive within himself. She doesn't compete with his mission, she completes it. Her empathy becomes the gravity that keeps him from drifting too far into the abstraction of genius. And perhaps that's the most human part of this entire story, that even the most future, obsessed mind still needs a place to land. Understanding at its deepest level is a kind of love that doesn't seek ownership. It's the kind that says, I see the storm, but I'm not afraid of it. And when you find someone who can say that to you, not through words, but through the calmness in their eyes, you begin to rediscover yourself. He doesn't love her because she makes him forget his world. He loves her because she helps him remember why he started building it in the first place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the quiet truth behind brilliance. Every extraordinary mind has, somewhere in its orbit, an ordinary moment of stillness, someone who holds that space so the world's noise doesn't swallow it whole. For him, that person is her, the woman who understands him better than anyone else. Because sometimes it doesn't take a whole world to make someone feel seen. It just takes one person who listens deeply enough to hear the language of genius hidden beneath the silence of exhaustion. And when that happens, even the man who builds rockets learns how to land.